you sat down to look something up. One thing. It was going to take 5 minutes. 2.5 hours later, you are 17 tabs deep into the most comprehensive, self-directed research session of your life. You have learned more about this one topic than most people learn in a semester. You have completely forgotten to eat, and the 3 other things you were supposed to do today have not been touched. You are not distracted. You are the opposite of distracted. You are so focused, it is almost alarming. And somehow that focus has made your day fall apart just as effectively as if you had been unable to concentrate at all. Welcome to Hyperfocus, the ADHD experience that nobody outside of the community fully understands and that even people inside the community often cannot explain accurately. Today, we are going to talk about what hyperfocus actually is neurologically, why it feels so good, why it can be so destructive, how it shows up specifically in healthcare training, and most importantly, how to start directing it intentionally so it works for you instead of against you. Let's start with what hyperfocus actually is, because I think there is a widespread misunderstanding about it that makes it harder to work with. Hyperfocus is not a superpower that ADHD people can turn on at will. It is not a skill or a discipline or something you develop through practice. It is an involuntary neurological state that occurs when an ADHD brain encounters a stimulus that is sufficiently interesting, novel, urgent, or emotionally engaging to trigger a surge of dopamine that overrides the brain's normal attention regulation difficulties. In other words, hyperfocus is not you being exceptionally focused. It is your brain finally getting enough dopamine to function the way it is supposed to through a specific stimulus in a way that you did not choose and cannot fully control. This distinction matters enormously because it explains both why hyperfocus feels so good and why it is so difficult to redirect once it starts. When you are hyperfocused, your brain is finally in a state of regulation. The chronic low dopamine that underlies ADHD is temporarily resolved. Everything feels clear, fluid, effortless, and deeply satisfying. Of course, it is hard to stop. Your brain is experiencing something it is always seeking and rarely finding through normal means. I want to spend a moment on what hyperfocus actually feels like from the inside before we talk about its downsides, because I think it deserves to be honored before it gets pathologized. When hyperfocus hits on something you genuinely love or find meaningful, it is one of the most extraordinary cognitive experiences available to a human brain. Time stops having meaning. Self-consciousness disappears. The gap between thinking and doing collapses completely. You are not trying to work, you are just working. And the work is flowing out of you with a clarity and a depth that feels almost effortless, even though you are producing at an incredibly high level. For healthcare students, this can show up as the rotation, where a patient case is so interesting and complex that you spend 3 times as long on it as you were supposed to, and produce clinical reasoning that impresses your supervisor, even though you could not have told them how you did it. Or the study session, where you get so locked into understanding one concept that you emerge 4 hours later knowing it at a level that carries you through the entire exam. Or the research rabbit hole that starts as one question and ends with a comprehensive understanding of a topic that your classmates will spend weeks trying to piece together. This is the gift, and it is real. The ability to go that deep, that fast, on the things that capture your brain is genuinely remarkable. It is one of the reasons ADHD brains have historically been responsible for breakthroughs, innovations, and creative leaps that change fields. When the interest is there, the output is extraordinary. The problem is that interest is not a choice. Here's where hyperfocus becomes a problem. And I want to be honest about this because I think the ADHD community sometimes overcorrects into only talking about hyperfocus as a strength and undersells how genuinely disruptive it can be. Hyperfocus is not selective in a way that serves your actual priorities. It is selective in a way that serves your dopamine system. And your dopamine system does not care about your exam schedule, your clinical rotation requirements, your documentation deadlines, or your long-term goals. It cares about what is interesting right now. Which means hyperfocus will reliably direct your extraordinary focus toward the thing that is most engaging in the moment, not the thing that is most important, not the thing that is most urgent, not the thing that your supervisor is waiting for, the thing that your brain finds most stimulating right now. And the things that are most important are often not the most stimulating. Documentation is not stimulating. Administrative tasks are not stimulating. The study topic you already mostly understand but need to review is not stimulating. The email you need to send to your program director is not stimulating. These are exactly the tasks that hyperfocus will consistently deprioritize in favor of whatever your brain finds more interesting. The result is a pattern that a lot of ADHD people know intimately. You spend 4 hours going incredibly deep on the interesting thing and 0 hours on the necessary thing. You produce extraordinary work in one area and fall dangerously behind in another. You end the day feeling simultaneously incredibly productive and completely behind. Both things are true at the same time, and the contradiction is genuinely destabilizing. Let's get specific about how hyperfocus shows up in healthcare training, because I think this is where it creates the most complexity. The most common version in clinical settings is what I call beneficial hyperfocus with bad timing. You encounter a patient case that is genuinely fascinating. The presentation is unusual, the clinical reasoning is complex, the problem is interesting in a way that immediately captures your ADHD brain. And so you go deep. You spend significantly more time with that patient, that chart, that research than you were allocated. You produce excellent work. And in the process, you fall behind on your other patients, your documentation, your schedule, and whatever your clinical instructor was expecting from you that afternoon. The work was good, the timing was terrible, and the consequences are real regardless of the quality of the output. The second version is hyperfocus on the wrong thing entirely. You sit down to study for your upcoming clinical exam, your notes are open, your intention is genuine, and then something adjacent catches your attention. A related topic that is more interesting than what you actually need to review. A tangential question that sends you down a research path. A concept from a different system that suddenly makes more sense and you want to understand it fully before you move on. An hour later, you have learned something genuinely valuable that has nothing to do with what your exam is testing, and you have not touched the material you actually needed. The third version is hyperfocus on distraction. This is the least flattering version, and I think it is important to name it honestly. Sometimes the thing your brain hyperfocuses on is not clinically interesting or intellectually valuable, it is just dopaminergic. Social media, a show, a game, a conversation that started as a quick break. Your brain found something that gives it the stimulation it needs, and now it will not let go. And 2 hours have passed, and the thing you needed to do is still waiting. This is not a moral failing. It is your brain doing what ADHD brains do when they encounter a high stimulation alternative to a low stimulation obligation. But naming it honestly is important because managing it requires understanding it clearly. So how do you actually work with hyperfocus rather than just being at its mercy? Because I want to be really clear that the goal is not to eliminate hyperfocus or to treat it as something to be suppressed. The goal is to build enough structure around it that it becomes a tool you can use rather than a force that uses you. The first strategy is interest engineering. Since hyperfocus is triggered by interest, novelty, urgency, and emotional engagement, you can sometimes deliberately create those conditions around the tasks you need to focus on. Make the task more interesting by connecting it to something you genuinely care about. If you need to study a clinical concept that feels dry, find the case study version of it. Find the real-world application. Find the patient story that makes it matter. Your brain does not hyperfocus on abstract information, but it absolutely will hyperfocus on a compelling clinical scenario that happens to teach you the same content. Create artificial urgency with time constraints. Set a timer for 25 minutes and commit to working on the task until it goes off. The ticking clock creates a low-level urgency that can be enough to initiate engagement, even when the task itself is not naturally stimulating. Once you are in it, your brain sometimes locks on and continues past the timer on its own. Use novelty deliberately. Work in a different location. Use a different format. If you always study by reading, switch to teaching the content out loud to nobody. If you always make notes in a document, try drawing a concept map instead. Novelty triggers dopamine. Dopamine triggers engagement. Engagement can trigger hyperfocus on the right thing. The second strategy is environmental design for hyperfocus management. If you know that hyperfocus can cause you to lose track of time completely, build time awareness into your environment rather than relying on your internal sense of time, which ADHD time blindness makes completely unreliable. Set multiple alarms, not just one. One alarm is easy to dismiss or miss entirely when you are hyperfocused. Set an alarm for when you need to start transitioning, another for when you actually need to stop, and another as a final warning. Multiple alarms create multiple interruption points that are harder to sleep through cognitively. Use a visual timer that you can see while you are working. There are physical timers designed for this purpose that show you visually how much time is remaining as a shrinking colored arc. Seeing time pass visually is significantly more effective for ADHD brains than an abstract number on a clock, because it makes time tangible rather than conceptual. Remove high dopamine alternatives from your environment before you sit down to work. If your phone is within reach, your brain knows it is there, and the low-level pull toward it is consuming attention even when you are not actively using it. Put it in another room, put it in a drawer, put it somewhere that requires a deliberate physical action to retrieve it. That friction is enough to interrupt the automatic reach in many cases. And tell someone what you are working on and when you plan to finish. External accountability is one of the most effective hyperfocus management tools available because it creates social urgency around the task. Letting someone down by not finishing what you said you would finish is emotionally salient enough to compete with the pull of hyperfocus in a way that internal motivation often cannot. The third strategy is hyperfocus mapping for clinical settings specifically. At the start of each rotation or clinical week, take 5 minutes to identify the 2 or 3 tasks or patient types that are most likely to trigger hyperfocus for you. The interesting cases, the complex presentations, the topics you find genuinely fascinating, and then build explicit time boundaries around those things before they start. If you know that complex neurological cases pull you into hyperfocus, build in a buffer, allocate more time than you think you need, and set a hard stop alarm. Tell yourself before you start that you will spend this specific amount of time with this patient, and then you are moving on regardless of where you are in the process. The decision is made in advance when your rational brain is in charge, not in the moment when your dopamine system is. For documentation specifically, which is the task most commonly displaced by hyperfocus, try the one-touch rule. Every patient encounter gets documented before you move to the next one. Not at the end of the day, not when you have time. Immediately after, this removes the option for hyperfocus on the next interesting thing to push documentation to a time that never arrives. It will feel inefficient at first. It is not. It is the most efficient documentation system available to an ADHD brain because it eliminates the reconstruction problem of trying to remember details from multiple encounters at the end of an exhausted day. I want to close by coming back to something I said at the beginning. Hyperfocus is not a superpower you can turn on at will, but it is also not a problem to be solved. It is a feature of a brain that is seeking stimulation, connection, and meaning, and finding extraordinary depth when it encounters those things. The work is not to eliminate hyperfocus or to treat it as a liability. The work is to build enough external structure around your life that hyperfocus has good containers to flow into, that when it activates, it is more likely to be pointed at something that matters. That when it pulls you off course, you have systems in place that catch you before you have lost an entire day. You are not going to be able to hyperfocus on demand, but you can create conditions that make it more likely to show up on the right things. You can build environments that protect you from its worst consequences, and you can develop the self-awareness to recognize when it is happening and make a conscious choice about whether to follow it or redirect it. That is not perfect control, but it is meaningful agency over something that has probably felt completely out of your control for most of your life. And that agency compounds over time. Every rotation where you manage hyperfocus more intentionally than the last. Every study session where you engineer interest before you start. Every clinical day where you build your time boundaries in advance. These are all deposits into a version of yourself that is not just surviving with ADHD, but actually building a professional life around how your brain works. That is the whole point of this channel, and that is exactly what the Mind Emotion Clinical Focus Guide is built to support. If you want the full system for managing your week, your study sessions, and your clinical rotations in a way that accounts for how your ADHD brain actually works, the Mind Emotion Clinical Focus Guide has everything we talked about today and more. The study session template is specifically designed to work with ADHD attention patterns, including hyperfocus. The rotation section covers clinical time management in detail, and the weekly system gives you the external structure that makes intentional hyperfocus management actually possible. The reading guide and the workbook are both linked in the description. The bundle gets you both together. Go check it out. Structure your mind, move with purpose. I will see you in the next one.